And it's very striking that the mainstream has become very aggressive on some of this progressivism, including transgenderism. And I can't help but assume that there's a transference of some kind going on here, right? The loss of one religious belief system has led to a vacuum, and into it has rushed this new one.
Gender ideology is filling the gap that has been vacated by the Catholic Church to a large extent. You know, when I was growing up, if somebody said they were an atheist, they were frowned upon. You know, they were ostracized. Oh, that person's an atheist. It's almost more difficult for a person who's Catholic and say, oh, I'm a practicing Catholic. They can be mocked, treated like, oh, so strange and outdated. Whereas the theory of gender identity really is something that's celebrated, that's, this is the new sacred belief system to a large extent. The idea of gender identity is sacred, but also that, like Durkheim, the sociologist, talked about religions as societies, actually. They keep a community together. So there is very much a sense of community amongst people who have gender identities. There's the symbol, the Progress Pride flag. I mean, there are so many things. There is a display of pronouns is like, you can say that's like displaying a crucifix for people who are Christian and want to display that belief. So a lot of my work colleagues at the moment use pronouns. And once you see the pronoun, they understand that gender identity is something that's really important. And so they believe there's a need to display that belief. There's also, there are heretics, there are blasphemers, there are apostates. So somebody who has transitioned, for example, and then detransitions, they would be considered the apostates. They're shunned. There are sacred ideas. During Pride Month in particular would be considered a kind of a sacred month. Yeah.
One quirk that just occurs to me is that, which maybe does have parallels with some other religious practices, but is that within transgenderism, you have trans people themselves. And then you have the allies, the much larger group of people. And I guess one parallel might be with a priesthood or something like that, but there's clearly two tiers within the belief system.
There is a hierarchical structure. I mean, you could think of the caste system in Hinduism, for example. You could think in Catholicism, you've got the Pope, the archbishops, the bishops, the priests, and then the people who go to Mass. So the hierarchy is believers, I suppose, the family, the community.
And of course, sometimes gender non-conforming males, to my knowledge, if this is always the case, can have a kind of sacred role in different religions. I mean, I did an episode last year on Hydra, and I believe within Roman paganism as well, eunuchs had a sacred role sometimes. So this isn't unprecedented that you would see cutting off the male genitalia as having religious significance.
That can be considered connected to the idea of the soul as something higher than the body. And the body has been associated with sin, whereas the soul is something that's higher. That it's the body that does bad things or things that are considered bad. The idea of transcending the limitation of the body. Saints did it too. Catholic saints, they would have done awful things to their bodies sometimes.
One way in which transgenderism differs is that I don't know, I mean, I'm asking you as a world religious expert, is there's no deity. I mean, there's the supernatural belief in the sense that gender identity is supernatural, but there isn't a god or gods, really. I don't think so.
So other religions don't have gods, like Taoism and Buddhism. I know there are deities within Buddhism, but it's often considered to be an atheistic or more philosophical religion. The concept of gender identity is the sacred concept or the sacred idea really at the heart of it.
It's very rare to come across someone who believes in transgenderism and doesn't also hold views about gay rights and race. And, there's a package, right, of which this is maybe the most religious component.
Yeah, I think it does. So it's probably associated then to the idea of oppression and privilege and intersectionality, and they all work together. And actually, I do think that these are all can be said to be founded on a kind of a Christian European idea, which, of equality and social justice and liberation and look after the most oppressed. And also another thing about gender identity, I remember once speaking it was a trans woman, and she said, "Oh, but I'm Catholic. I go to mass." So I don't think it's an exclusive belief system. We live at a time when there's a kind of a pick and mix spirituality, or it's sometimes called as a spiritual supermarket. So we can all have a bit of that, have a bit of that, have a bit of that. So, a lot of people who are gender ideologists, and I do think it is an ideology, would also have other religious beliefs as well. They're not exclusive.
It clearly has religious qualities, but maybe it could be better understood as being a Christian heresy, in that it takes so many Christian ideas, but then really subverts them, and obviously also subtracts God and Christ and all sorts of important things within Christianity. But as you say, not just equality, but a lot of the rhetoric, progressivism in general.
I think there are things in it that aren't there in other religions. Like, I think in other religions, there is a big thing about humility and about maybe transcending the ego, or understanding that there is something transcendent, that we are tiny. I was reading an article yesterday about Zen Buddhism, and it said there's a lot of parallels between Zen Buddhism and modern psychology. But in Zen, the idea is to move beyond the ego, to move beyond the idea of self, whereas in modern psychology, it's all about developing the self. I think within gender ideologies, there's a huge focus on the self and the ego. I'm not sure it's very healthy for the individual or for society. So, but the problem is that we're at a time that we can't even have these conversations. It's just, this is a topic that is not discussed.